you.
Okay, good. Okay, so I was asked to speak a little bit about the fact that this is sort of 25 years after economists started getting involved in market design. And, I should emphasize that market design is an ancient human activity, right? Not invented by economists. But economists have finally gotten the confidence to start talking about the rules of the game and to help think about markets and how to fix them when they're broken. And so some of that started about 25 years ago. And what I'm going to do today is just take you back to three of those 25 or so years ago design projects and tell you what's become of those markets today and what their current problems are, because market design isn't one and done. Markets live in complicated environments that change. So it's a little bit like building a house. After you've built it or extensively renovated a house, the world changes and you need to do new things. Maybe you, in the interim, you've bought an electric car, and when you built the house, there weren't electric cars. So now you need to redo the electrical system. And that's the case with markets too, because the world changes. So I'm going to tell you about three now venerable market design projects. One is the market for new doctors. That's a market that in its current form actually started in 1951 without the help of economists. And I got involved in about 25 years ago in 1995. And the efforts then were around building and designing a centralized clearinghouse that would solve problems of congestion in the process of making offers and acceptances. And as you'll see today, that market is having new problems of congestion, not with offers and acceptances. The centralized clearinghouse is working fine, but in the earlier process of applications and interviews, problems that are also going to come up when I talk about the market for new PhD economists, which are, again, well, it doesn't predate the entry of economists, but that market really became thick only in the 1970s when the job openings for economists got started. And that created a thick market for economics. Some of you in computer science, for instance, maybe in job markets that are less thick now, where word of mouth still passes up, uses what is how job notices are circulated. But we're having some interesting developments in the job market for new economists that have to do with the fact that interviewing has moved earlier than the meetings, and that some of the coordination effects that used to happen from the national meetings are not happening anymore. And then finally, I'll talk to you about kidney exchange, where first kidney exchange in the United States happened in 2000. Economists, including some sitting here, have been involved in that since shortly after. And that's a market where there's been continual adaptation. And the difference between the first two and the third market is the first two are labor markets that really happen only once a year. And so they get tested and refined and attacked only occasionally, whereas kidney exchange happens every day. So that's something where, in order to move kidney exchange along, we've been in a process of constant renovation, if you like. Okay, so to fix ideas, let's think about how practical market design is different from mechanism design. And here's the sort of famous Hurwitz diagram, which says, if you're a mechanism designer, you control a universe in which you can create the strategies that players have and the games that they play, and design them in order to get desired results. But of course, if you're a market designer, you're mostly designing marketplaces, and the mechanism sits in a small corner, in a small part of a large economic environment. And that economic environment can change over time, and it involves other strategies than the ones that involve in participating in the mechanism. In particular, people may have to decide whether to participate in the mechanism or not. And it may involve other players as well. And these things are a changing environment. And so the things I'm going to tell you about today have to do with marketplace adaptations to the changing environment. And so let me start with the labor market for new doctors, which has just completed yet another year of activity. But it has a long history, starting in 1900 when internships were developed. So now, in order to be licensed to practice medicine in the United States, it's not enough to have an MD degree. You have to be licensed. And to be licensed, you have to do some kind of practical training in a hospital that's today, the first year of it is still called an internship, is today called a residency. And what happened in the early 1900s was the dates of appointment got earlier and earlier. from year to year. And we're going to see that something like that is threatening to happen in the economics PhD market. So keep that in mind. And various kinds of fixes were made that worked only incompletely about the times of appointment dates and the processing of offers and acceptances. There was congestion. Lots of things had to happen in short times. But eventually, in the 1950s, a centralized clearinghouse was developed, which had high rates of orderly participation, and worked well for quite a while. But one of the things that changed in the external environment, outside of the mechanism, was the composition of the medical labor force. So in the 1950s, almost every new graduate with an MD in the United States was a man. And by 1970s, about 10% of the graduates were women, and today it's fully half. And so what we started to see was couples going on the labor force needing two jobs, and that the clearinghouse wasn't working well for that, and that's how I got involved in starting in 1995, redesigning the algorithm so it would be friendly to the new demographics of medicine. So for a long time now, that's been in place for a while, and it's been working very well. Last year we had something like 1,200 couples. 2,400 doctors going through the match as couples. So the way that mechanism works, the mechanism sitting in the larger market, is people formulate rank order lists. Here's my first choice, my second choice, my third choice, on both sides of the market. So doctors are ranking physicians. Residency programs are ranking doctors. Then it goes through a deferred acceptance algorithm, appropriately modified, and then they have a celebration on match day, and there's a scramble. The scramble actually happens earlier than match day, so its results can be announced on match day. But that's the mechanism. It's been in place, it hasn't been changed in the last 25 years. Seems to be working fine. But before you can enter that mechanism, you have to form those preferences. And one of the big things that's changed over time is that applications have become electronic. That's, of course, not just true in medicine. It's true in college admissions. It's true in economics. So that makes it easy to apply to lots of places. So over time, there have been increasingly many applications, and then employers have to decide who to interview, and that's hard to do when you have hundreds of applications for each position. And so they've had increasingly many interviews, because if you're going into a match, a centralized clearinghouse that's going to use the deferred acceptance algorithm, it's good to have long lists of preferences, because you're not sure where you're going to end up. So if you go on lots of interviews, you can have long lists and be on long lists of preferences. And they've been running into congestion problems, too many applications to look at, too many interviews to run, how to decide which ones. So they've started to adapt signaling, which I'll tell you about more. It's also something we developed in the economics market about 20 years ago. But they're having a lot of discussion about this, and some of it is not to what market designers would consider to be to the point. A lot of the discussion talks about this whole process as the match, and fails to notice which parts are working well and which parts are working badly. So there's been a symphony of suggestions in the medical literature about what to do. One of them signaling, which I'll talk to you about. Another one is interview matching, whereas Itai has been prominent in that. Itai Ashlagi, who's here. Limits on applications or interviews, which you can imagine have some serious market design consequences, and you have to think of how you were going to limit applications and interviews. And then there was one that I'm going to tell you about, just because sometimes you have to play defense in market design as well as offense. There was a really ill-conceived proposal for an early match, which was gonna in OBGYN, in obstetrics and gynecology. There was a proposal that got some traction to have two matches, and the first one would require each employer, each program, to only match half of its positions, after which another match would be done for the other half. So those of you who know about stable matching know that this is a crazy idea, because people matched in the first match wouldn't necessarily get matched to where they wanted to be, because where they wanted to be only had half its positions available in the first match. So if I was someone who was going to be you're an employer, your second choice, you have two positions, and you're only allowed to use one of them in the early match, you match to someone you like better than me in the first choice, and I match somewhere else in the early match. And now in the late match, we both are sorry not to be able to match to each other, but were already matched to someone else. So this is something that would create instabilities and would also harm many applicants and proposals and proposers. It took a long time to convince the medical community that this was a bad idea, and we may possibly have done that. You know, Itai and I and some colleagues have a paper just last month going through years of data to make the simple point that I just made. And the the last line is it produces lots of instabilities, things like that. You know, looking at the years of data, but what seems to be the winning political argument is, well, harm more applicants than it would help. And so I think, but I'm not yet sure that this proposal is dead on arrival. But part of market design is playing defense, protecting things that work against ideas that would vandalize them. Okay, so I want to tell you about signaling in the medical market, and let me just remind you that about 20 years ago, this large committee of the American Economic Association instituted this procedure where new economists going on the market can signal that they're interested in interviews. So there's a process of applications and interviews in economics, new PhD market. Also, there's congestion. Lots of universities get many more applications than they have positions. We used to interview at the meetings. That's changing. But one of the things we did to help organize the interviews was to allow signaling of interest in interviews. Well, the medical specialties, knowing about economics, that's been a big part of their discussion, specialty by specialty have decided to use signals. And in economics, we allow people to have two signals. That's partly because of concern about what allowing many signals would do. But in medicine, there's been some experimentation, so we're going to learn more about this. And many of those numbers are small, so adult neurology allows 3 signals, anesthesiology allows 5, but orthopedic surgery allows 30 signals. Okay, so the thing about 30 signals, of course, is that when you allow 30 signals, now I'm an employer and you guys are new doctors, and I think you have 30 signals and you couldn't even send me one. You must not be very interested. So 30 signals are starting in the data to act as a soft cap on the number of applications. You can still submit 120 applications, but you only send 30 signals, and this is going to help organize the interview process in a way that may or may not be good, because we still have to see whether lots of the same people will get all the interviews or whatever. But that's in process. They've only done that a year. And in obstetrics, these are our colleagues who were also interested in the early match. They've decided to have 18 signals, 3 gold and 15 silver. So we avoided that in economics also but haven't seen their data yet. So this is in progress. In other words, they're having they had trouble in the past in congestion with offers and acceptances. Now they're having trouble with applications and interviews, and that's an important part of the market. A lot of my colleagues who help operate the match say this has nothing to do with us. We're the mechanism at the end of the road. And what I sort of say to them is, if you run a popular restaurant and the city tears up the road in front of your restaurant, you have a problem, even though the food is still good. If people can't get to the restaurant, the market is having a problem. And so we're, deep in discussions about that. Okay, so because medicine, their early problems started with unraveling and proceeded also in other specialties over time. And because I'm going to talk to you next about economics, I want to remind you what unraveling looks like. And what it looks like is year after year, when you look at the interviews and offer process, they get earlier and earlier. Okay, when unraveling is a process where the market is in disequilibrium, and the market, this is gastroenterology, it's another medical market, but the market not only gets early, it gets diffuse in time. So the black dots here are interviews, the yellow dots are offers, and the yellow dots are offers. And what you see is lots of offers start to be made before other firms have even started to interview. Okay, here's a different graph of the same thing. Each of these horizontal lines is some employer, when they could possibly have made their earliest offer, and what's the latest possible date that offer was open to. So these lines are much longer than they are in reality, but we're working with noisy data. But what you see, I drew a red line here in the middle. What you see is a lot of programs are finished making offers before other programs have even started. And that's what the idea of exploding offers comes from, is that you might be a hot item on the market, but the places you're really interested in are planning to interview and hire late in the year. You get an early interview and offer, and you have to answer before you know whether you can get a job later. So that's a problem that many markets have unraveled. And it seems to, the market design issues, it seems to have to do with markets where you can make exploding offers and where commitments are binding. Okay, so let me now tell you about the market for new PhD economists. And many of you have at some point participated in that market. And some of you might be just about to. Okay, so here's a picture meant to remind you of the picture I just showed you of the medical market. The market for new economists begins with job ads in the JOE, the job opening for economists, and now a number of other sources as well. It's become electronic over time. It wasn't always. So it's now easy to make lots of applications. So an application is no longer as strong a signal of interest as it once was when applications needed their own cover letters and other accoutrements. So there are lots and lots of applications and reference letters, which also now go through clearinghouses. And in economics, we've developed a signaling procedure to help relieve some of the congestion about deciding who to interview. And those interviews used to happen at the AEA meetings in first weekend in January, but they didn't this year. And over COVID, they didn't. They happened by Zoom. And Zoom meetings are pretty nice, it turns out. So they may not be going away. So the congestion problem is easing maybe in interviewing, because you can interview over a longer period of time. But now we don't go through a centralized clearinghouse. We have flyouts, which, because the interviews are getting more dispersed in time, the flyouts have been getting more dispersed in time, and offers are now more dispersed in time. That is, having the AEA meetings and all the interviews the first weekend in January used to discipline the time at which offers could be made and how dispersed they could be. And that's no longer the case. So, so now the process of flyouts and negotiations and second visits are taking place over a longer period of time. And this is sort of an early warning. It hasn't gotten tremendously out of hand yet, but it looks like we might be starting to see the beginning of unraveling in the economics PhD market with dispersed early offers with early deadlines. So the AEA has been conducting focus groups, and there are a bunch of markets that move earlier than the economics job market, but hire economics PhDs. So the European market has earlier meetings. The agricultural economics goes earlier. Marketing departments sometimes hire PhD economists. They go quite a bit earlier. Industry, the Association of Business Economists has a tech conference in November that's a job market conference. So lots of people who hire economists are going earlier than the AA meetings, but so are other economists. So many economics departments aren't allowed by their deans to make multiple offers for a position. So they have to make offers sequentially. So they really want to know, you're our first choice, but if you're not going to come, we really want to go to our second choice quickly. So let us know by tomorrow. That makes it hard for the market to function the way we like. And that includes many liberal arts colleges, includes many federal agencies, which are regulated not to make multiple offers. And then there are some late movers, among which are the elite research universities, typically, who benefit from everyone being able to look at everyone, because if you're at Harvard or Stanford or MIT, you have some presumption that maybe people are interested in your jobs should you make them. But also lots of universities don't convene until late in January. They're on semester systems, and they're, there they are, and some of their candidates who they interviewed are gone by the time they can get their committees together. So here we're in a period of disequilibrium as well, which I'm not optimistic about. I've studied many markets in disequilibrium of this sort, and my guess is we're going to go through some more. But there's been efforts to have guidelines, and the Finance Association had the toughest guidelines, which said that the American Finance Association doesn't consider early acceptances before they picked a date, I think February 20th, to be binding. That is, they said, as we have successfully done in some medical markets, they said, if you get an early offer and take it, you can change your mind because there's a date before which you're not supposed to have to make a firm decision. Incidentally, in universities, we do this with graduate admissions. And so April 15th is a magic date for graduate admissions. And the Council of Graduate Schools has just such a policy which says, if you accept an early offer, you can change your mind before April 15th. So if you're involved in recruiting new PhD students, you've seen rules like this. But it remains to be seen whether they're going to, these rules, whether you can in fact convince new finance graduates, new economics graduates, and the people who hire them that it's actually feasible to accept an offer and then change your mind. That works in some cultures and not in others. In gastroenterology, that turns out to work. So we made such a rule in gastroenterology, and it's not that we see lots of early offers and changing minds, it's that we stopped seeing the early offers, and that allowed gastroenterology to move into a centralized clearinghouse at a much later date than they'd been hiring. We tried to do the same thing with orthopedic surgery, and orthopedic surgery said there's no way that someone is going to accept an offer from some senior surgeon and then later change their mind. But it turns out the orthopedic surgery professional organizations have much more compulsory power than the American Economic Association does. So what they did in orthopedic surgery, they said, if people make early offers, we won't allow them to present papers at our national meeting. And, so we're going to have to explore in economics what we can do and what we can't. I'm hopeful that if we can move the elite universities to keep them at their traditional position, that the weight of that will stop some of the unraveling, that lots of the candidates for these earlier positions are people who might turn down the earlier positions if they think they, by waiting, could get a much better position, and that might temper some of the very early offers, but it remains to be seen. Okay, so lastly, let me talk to you a little bit about kidney exchange, which also predates the work of economists. The first kidney exchange was done in the Rhode Island Hospital in the year 2000 in the United States. And a kidney exchange is a way of taking a pair. So very quickly, you can get a kidney from a live donor because healthy people have 2 kidneys and can remain healthy with 1. There's a big shortage of kidneys, so increasing the availability of transplants is a good thing. Here's a pair that's basically incompatible. Donor 1 can't give to recipient 1, but could give to someone else's recipient and vice versa. So kidney exchange is looking for exchanges of kidneys where you can get more transplants. And in 2004, Typhoon and Utku and I helped Frank Delmonico and a number of his surgical and medical colleagues to form the first inter-hospital kidney exchange, which started to make the market thick. We formed a program, New England program for kidney exchange, which united the 14 transplant centers in New England and allowed them to exchange kidneys. And that got off to a very slow start. When NBER finally closed its doors many years later in 2011, so 7 years later, they'd only managed to do 83 exchanges because it turns out there's lots of difficulties to overcome. And one of them is that those simple paired exchanges aren't really sufficient to make the market thick enough because of the problem that Jevons told us about the double coincidence of wants. It's hard to do straight barter. But one of the things we learned to do over a period of years is long chains started by non-directed donors. So a lot of kidney exchanges today don't look like those 2 pairs, but they look like someone starts off and gives a kidney to a patient whose donor then passes it forward, and those chains can get quite long. This is the picture that appeared in the New England Journal of Medicine. This one appeared in People magazine, and the last donor left hanging there, which is blood type AB, this lady named Helena McKinney. It took 2 years. It was sort of a mistake to end with her, but it took 2 years to find her an appropriate recipient in the kidney exchange pool, and she was good, and she extended the picture to have another dozen people in it. So sometimes you can get a lot of exchanges going, and that's helped a lot. Those really became part of standard practice only in 2011, work that Itai and others have done. And so in the US, we are growing the number of kidney exchanges, right? In 2021, you can see COVID in the picture. Here's the COVID year. living donor surgeries are elective surgeries. So at the beginning of COVID, they just shut down. But we're going up. And so we get about not quite 10% of the living donor transplants in the US are now done by kidney exchange. So, along that road are many market design innovations. So I could tell you about victory after victory, but it's in a war that we are losing, right? So diabetes is epidemic. There are roughly 100,000 people on the waiting list for deceased donors right now. There are 600,000 people on dialysis. So this story is far from done. So one reason it's far from done is some people are very hard to transplant. They have lots of antibodies. They need a very big pool, a very thick market to find a compatible kidney. So one thing to do is to try to erase national borders. So here's a picture that shows you per million population donation in blue of deceased donors and in orange of living donors. And what you see is in rich countries with good medical systems, we are still mostly depending on deceased donors. But in poorer countries, it's hard to set up a widespread deceased donor program because you need good hospitals everywhere, whereas you can have living donation at a few good hospitals in your capital. So as you see countries that do fewer, you see they depend more and more on living donation. And so there's an opportunity for them and also across borders to expand kidney exchange where it'll be particularly valuable in places where they do lots of living donation. So our first attempt at doing this was inviting a Mexican pair. The lady standing next to me in the picture with the yellow dress is Marisol Robles, and she entered an American chain that would have ended with donation to a deceased donor because the American donor was 67, and lots of American surgeons think 67 is old, which is puzzling because I remember I wasn't so old when I was 67. But anyway, that's become something that we can try to do because they don't yet have active kidney exchange in Mexico, although we're working hard to build it there. Not everyone likes this. One of the things I study is repugnance. So here's the head of the Spanish organ transplant organization saying that the ONT, the National Transplant Organization of Spain, has prevented the entry in Europe of a new form of organ trafficking proposed by a winner of the Nobel Prize in economics. So she and I aren't buddies. We were on the same panel in Buenos Aires at a big biannual meeting this past summer. But fortunately, this idea of crossing borders and making it easy to cross borders is gaining ground. Here's an article in The Lancet by a bunch of moral philosophers, including Peter Singer, who's the sort of the founder of the effective altruism movement. And he says a lot of things. He says a lot of sensible things, but he ends with, misguided objections should not be allowed to prevent the global kidney exchange from realizing its potential to reduce suffering and save the lives of rich and poor patients alike. So we're making some progress there. And we're making, of course, progress in the places where we do this. So here's that particular kidney exchange that I just showed you was on the front page of Newsweek on Espanol, where they said, this was in 2017, I think, just as US President Donald Trump is seeking to build a wall of thousands of miles on the border with Mexico, a tireless surgeon and economists joined forces to exchange organs between citizens of both countries. So I think there's a prospect that what we'll be able to do in kidney exchanges is somewhat, if not erase, lower international borders, and that will be a good thing. But it's not an easy thing. But just incidentally, on that front, I got to go to Abu Dhabi in the summer of 2021 for the first kidney exchange between Israel and the UAE. And the story there is both countries are small. Both of them have populations about 10 million. And that's not enough to do kidney exchange on a scale that allows you to transplant the highly sensitized patients. But so I think it's an important thing for small countries. I'm on my way this weekend to Croatia with that message. There's only 4 million Croatians. But another way to think about it is, before I showed you the graph that the doctors like, which is how countries do per million population. But of course, you can also look at who's doing lots of transplants. And people are doing lots of transplants if they have lots of people. So after the US, there's China and India and Brazil. And extending kidney exchange there in those places has different problems. So for instance, in India, they don't allow non-directed donations. So there's a wonderful transplant nephrologist named Vivek Kutte in Ahmedabad in the state of Gujarat, who I've had an opportunity to work with. And he arranges long cyclic exchanges. You know, here's a 10-pair cycle. And needless to say, there's lots of logistics and planning and getting agreement. He has everybody in this cycle meet beforehand. So non-anonymously, which is how we do most exchanges in the US, non-anonymously. He has them meet non-anonymously and all agree that we're in this together. And this is sort of a market design innovation that comes a little bit or resembles what's been done in microfinance of getting a bunch of borrowers to agree that they're all in this together and will be mutually responsible for each other. So we're trying to help him change the law, but in the meantime, there are market design solutions that let him make progress. So, and there are, you know, you can get good transplants. So here I am watching a surgeon in Ahmedabad with a Da Vinci robot. So fancy surgical technique. The patient is off to the right. When I came into the OR, the surgeon got up and reached out his hand to shake hands, and he wasn't wearing gloves, and I wasn't wearing gloves. You know, he's not in the sterile field. So there will come a time with even more reliable internet when he doesn't have to be in the same hospital. So there are going to be other ways to erase boundaries. So let me end here by saying that you know, the marketplace that we design, the mechanism that we design, sits in a larger economic environment. The larger economic environment is changing, and so part of market design, like building a house, after you build the house, you have to maintain it, and you know, building a house and renovating it and then maintaining it, one just melts into the other. You know, I say this as someone who moved into a new house about 10 years ago, and we've stopped renovating it, but we still know how to reach the contractors, because every now and then something doesn't work the way it used to. Thank you.